Karina abruptly sat up, drenched in cold sweat. She immediately recognized her surroundings, realizing she was back home with Kostya beside her. Trying to leave the room without disturbing him, she didn't want him to give her that pitiful look again or ask if she needed to see a doctor. It had happened before, leaving an unpleasant residue in her mind. Once again, the nightmare that had haunted her for years had jolted her awake. She remembered when she was young and had just lost her parents. She never dreamed at all. But now, as a grown and supposedly self-sufficient woman, the nightmare had become a recurring ordeal. Every time she woke up, screaming in terror. She used to be in a relationship with Stepan, and they were even planning to get married. However, one night, he reached his breaking point. Instead of embracing and comforting her as he had done before, he started packing his belongings into a bag. Karina asked in a trembling voice, "Stepan, what are you doing?" He glared at her with anger in his eyes. "Me, I'm leaving. I can't live like this anymore. Your abnormal screams wake me up several times a month, and it's driving me crazy. I refuse to continue this. I don't want a wife who's lost touch with reality, and I don't want to bring children into this world with an abnormal woman." Stepan stormed out, slamming the door behind him. From that point on, the dreams of collapsing buildings, erupting volcanoes, and people fleeing through clouds of ash and dust, including her parents, ceased. Karina spent an entire year recovering from Stepan's abandonment. She anxiously waited for the nightmares to return, but they never did. Stepan never called again, and gradually Karina began to relax. She received an opportunity to change her professional field, offered a job transfer to another part of the country where the company was opening a new branch. Without any hesitation, she accepted the offer. After all, what did she have to lose? She only had a rented apartment, and the house she and her parents once happily lived in was in a small town almost 100 kilometers away. A neighbor had promised to keep an eye on it, but if it had burned down, Karina wouldn't have felt much sorrow. She had tried to visit a few times, but the pain was so overwhelming that she could physically feel it. This house had been their family home, Karina's grandmother, Rita, her parents, and herself. They bought the house because Karina had been born with health issues, and the doctors recommended living closer to nature. Her mother and father were both lifeguards, not the typical rescuers, but the kind who were deployed on long business trips to save people from large-scale fires, accidents, and earthquakes. Every time they left on another assignment, her grandmother would baptize them and offer long prayers. Karina never asked her parents to give up such dangerous work. She simply prayed for their safety when they were away, shedding silent tears when she thought Karina couldn't hear. One day, her grandmother decided to make Karina's favorite pancakes with cottage cheese. As the television played in the background, Grandma suddenly froze, her eyes fixed on the news report. Karina didn't fully comprehend what was being said, but the sight of her grandmother's shocked expression made her uneasy. The pancake her grandmother was wrapping turned over in her hands, and the cottage cheese slowly spilled onto the floor. Karina was so startled by that image of the curds splattering that it became etched in her memory, forever associating it with fear. Karina looked at her grandmother with frightened eyes, but the older woman remained silent, her gaze fixed on the television screen. Her eyes seemed vacant, devoid of their usual warmth. Then the doorbell rang, and Karina rushed to answer it. A man in the same uniform as her parents stood on the doorstep. It was at that moment that Karina's fear intensified. She was only 14 when she was left without her parents. After the man departed, her grandmother remained silent. Karina wept quietly, consumed by fear and grief. She couldn't fathom the reality that she would never see her mother and father again. Once again, the television displayed scenes of a cloud of dust and ash enveloping people. Karina couldn't tear her eyes away, hoping for a glimpse of her mom or dad amidst the chaos. But there was nothing. Suddenly, a thud echoed behind her, and Karina turned around and screamed. Her grandmother lay motionless on the floor, her eyes fixated on a single point. Karina didn't end up in an orphanage. Instead, she found herself under the care of her father and mother's boss, who took her into their custody. Grateful for their kindness, Karina appreciated their efforts to surround her with love and support. They even ensured she had the opportunity to study at a prestigious university. While they couldn't replace her mother, father, and grandmother, they did their best to ease Karina's burden and prevent her from breaking down. As she rushed into the kitchen, Karina poured herself a glass of water and collapsed onto a chair to catch her breath. Why did things have to be this way? It had been 12 years since her parents had passed away, and now, just as she was starting to date someone, these haunting dreams began. Lost in her thoughts, Karina glanced at her watch, realizing it was almost time to get up. What was the point of going back to bed? Perhaps she could make breakfast instead. Kostya always had his morning meal, although Karina couldn't bring herself to eat much. Curiously, during lunch at the cafe, the roles reversed. Karina ate heartily while Kostya settled for coffee and a sandwich. They would playfully argue about who was in the wrong. Preparing an omelette and some sandwiches, Karina headed to wake up Kostya, only to find him already awake. "Hi, darling," she greeted him. "Hey, why did you wake up so early?" he asked. Karina stared at him, wondering if he had heard her restless night, or if he was simply making conversation. "I couldn't sleep," she replied. They sat down for breakfast, and Karina even managed to enjoy a cup of coffee. "How are you today?" she inquired. "Karina, I'm going to visit my parents today," Kostya revealed. "Okay, then I'll finally clean out the pantry," Karina responded. Kostya didn't live with her, although he often stayed over. On the surface, it seemed like both of them were content with this arrangement, but appearances could be deceiving. At 26 years old, Karina desired to achieve something in her career, but family held significant meaning to her. Yet Kostya remained silent, never hinting that their 6-month relationship had provided ample time to evaluate and consider marriage. She couldn't bring herself to propose, could she? Kostya left first, as they worked in the same firm but in different offices and departments. The time until lunch flew by, with Karina immersing herself in work to the point of briefly having some free time. Assuming Kostya had eaten his pie and left without her, she hastened to the cafe. Upon stepping outside, her eyes immediately fell upon Kostya. He stood a short distance from the entrance, engaged in a conversation with a girl. "Your crazy girl didn't show up for lunch," the girl remarked. "I know," Kostya replied, sounding frustrated. "She's acting weird again. I'm tired of it." "Why don't you just let her go then?" the girl suggested. "It's complicated," Kostya sighed. "Who else would want her with all her issues? She doesn't even realize she needs help. And if I mention it, she'll get angry." Karina recoiled, her heart pounding in her chest. The words she had heard had shaken her to the core, compelling her to rush back to the office without a second thought. Later that evening, as the phone in her room spun incessantly, Karina found herself unable to pick up. She stared at it, contemplating the weight of her decision, until the vibrations finally ceased. With a sense of urgency, she composed a text message. "I'm in a chaotic state of mind. Please don't call again." Kostya persisted, making multiple attempts to reach her. Eventually, a text message from him appeared on her phone screen. "You truly are unhinged." In a decisive act, Karina deleted his number. Strangely, a newfound sense of relief washed over her. Somehow, she instinctively knew that the nightmares tormenting her would not plague her that night. And indeed, the next morning, she awoke with a cheerful disposition. Gazing at her reflection in the mirror, she spoke to herself. "So what now? Are we embarking on a fresh start?" Arriving at work, Karina wore a facade of normalcy. She engaged in conversations and smiled brightly, as if nothing had transpired. She skipped lunch, determined to shed a few extra pounds. Shortly after noon, Kostya unexpectedly appeared at the office. "Karina, can we talk?" he asked. Karina regarded him with an air of composure, even friendliness. About what? She inquired. About us? What's happening? Kostya, I implore you, why have you come? You don't love me, so why bother? Is it merely an obligation? That's quite foolish, don't you think? You're a well-educated adult, and yet you succumb to societal conventions. Kostya stood there, at a loss for words. It was a blow to his ego that Karina seemed unfazed. He made another attempt. How are you holding up now? Me? Karina seemed perplexed by the question. Kostya, of course, I am immensely grateful that you wasted 6 months on some deranged woman. But did I not survive without you for 26 years? I believe I can manage somehow. Now, please go, as it is working hours. She beamed a dazzling smile at him. Kostya abruptly turned and made his way to the door. Karina watched him intently before diverting her attention back to her papers. And what was that all about? A voice sounded directly next to her ear, causing Karina to jump. Sveta, how many times must I tell you not to sneak up on me like a cat? You'll give me a stutter. Karina scolded, though there was a hint of amusement in her voice. Sveta, Karina's friend and colleague, couldn't help but smile. Karinka, really? Did you just dismiss Kostya like that? Where are the tears? He's such a handsome. Sveta skillfully parodied her own words, which she had spoken at the beginning of their relationship. For some inexplicable reason, Sveta's friend immediately disliked Kostya upon meeting him. She didn't hold back, referring to him as a pompous moron, and adamantly refusing to visit Karina if Kostya was present. Karina couldn't understand why Sveta couldn't stand him. She approached her friend, seeking an explanation. Sveta, come on, you're my friend, aren't you? Once, they decided to take a stroll through the city together. Of course, I'm your friend, who welcomed you, took you in, and made you feel warm. Karina remembered how she had arrived in this cold and unwelcoming city, feeling utterly lost. She had called the office, and they had sent a cab to pick her up. Coincidentally, the same cab had also brought Sveta, who immediately took it upon herself to rescue Karina. The city turned out to be pleasant. It was just that Karina was exhausted and the weather was far from ideal. Sveta had shown herself to be genuine and cheerful, and from the very first moment, she had taken the weary Karina under her wing. Why are you asking? Sveta stopped abruptly, her hands dropping to her sides. Because I don't understand why my best friend can't stand my boyfriend. Don't you want me to be happy? Me? Of course, I want you to be happy. Sveta sniffed indignantly. Then why should your boyfriend be an exception? He's not right for you. He only cares about himself. Karina had to calm down her furious friend, who was always impulsive and brutally honest. It was a quality that garnered both respect and dislike from others. Sveta was practically a local girl, hailing from the outskirts of the city. Karina knew that Sveta used to live there with her parents until they bought her a small apartment in the city, even though she already owned a car. Sveta's mother had always worried about her driving in the dark during winter. Now Sveta loomed over Karina like a kite. What could Karina possibly say to her? Admit that Sveta was right? But there wasn't enough time to explain everything. Sveta, go to work. We'll celebrate with a bottle of champagne afterward, and I promise to tell you everything. That evening, after learning all the details, Sveta regarded Karina thoughtfully. Do you have some time off? Yes, I do. Karina replied cautiously, feeling a sense of foreboding. She knew Sveta was up to something extraordinary once again. And since Karina had time off, there was no way she could escape the impending situation. Sveta, I'm not going anywhere. Last time we nearly drowned because you insisted that those who haven't kayaked haven't truly experienced life. Karina exclaimed, recalling the terrifying weekend when Svetka convinced her to embark on that ill-fated adventure. Without Karina's resilience, they wouldn't have survived. Karina had to cling to the beam to prevent herself from being swept away by the current, all while supporting Svetka, who turned out to be a poor swimmer. After they were finally rescued, Karina had been seething with anger towards her friend, barely able to contain herself. But Svetka just smiled. "Well, we didn't die, did we? Everything turned out fine. What an adventure, you'll never forget it," Svetka remarked casually. That was certainly true. It was impossible to forget. And now Karina noticed the same mischievous glint in Svetka's eyes, just like before. "All right, don't scream. I'm not dragging you anywhere," Svetka assured her. "Let's just go to my grandmother's place. She lives by a peaceful lake, just a stone's throw from the woods. It's incredibly beautiful there, and there's not a soul around," Svetka suggested. "Doesn't she live with her parents?" Karina asked. "No, actually, she's not my grandmother. She's my great-grandmother. I don't even know how old she is, but we should definitely visit her. She's, well, how can I put it, a witch or something. That's why she lives away from everyone," Svetka explained, a mischievous smile playing on her lips. "Sveta, what kind of witch?" Karina chuckled. Svetka slyly squinted her eyes. "Karina, don't you already know, or are you pretending not to?" Karina sighed. "To sleep soundly, not to chase snakes, not to dive to the bottom of the lake, not to count wolves in the woods. Karina, enough of that. My grandmother is kind. And, by the way, she even has a microwave," Svetka declared. "Well, if there's a microwave, then I'm in. But mark my words, if anything strange happens, I'm leaving immediately," Karina warned. Karina felt grateful for Svetka's invitation. Though she had shown her strength during their previous ordeal, there was still a lingering resentment in her heart. Was it her fault for having nightmares? Did she deserve to be haunted by them forever alone? "Sveta, do you think I should see a doctor? Maybe they can prescribe some pills for me," Karina asked tentatively. "Save the doctor visits for your boyfriends. They're the ones who need it. No, they abandon their girlfriends when they need support the most." "Who knows? Men," Svetka replied, with Karina nodding in agreement. They both shared a disdain for the behavior of certain men. For now, Karina decided to put her thoughts about doctors aside. They had been walking along the winding path through the trees for an hour. "Sveta, you mentioned taking the shortcut, didn't you?" "Oh no, I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere. I've driven here before." "Well, turn on the navigation. You should have GPS on your phone." "Karina, what the heck is GPS? There's no signal out here." "Well, you're such a great friend. You should have chosen the right road." "We should have, but it's too late to dwell on it now. The path is all overgrown, and I'm not sure which way to turn. We'll have to walk." "No way, I'm not walking, that's for sure. There might be wolves lurking around. The local wolves must be starving. Nothing to eat but bones." Sveta gripped the steering wheel tightly and accidentally bumped the car into a tree. "Well, here we are. At least we've arrived somewhere." Sveta and Karina stepped out of the car, walked around, paused, and then retraced their steps. Sveta nervously bit her fingernail, lost in thought. "Well, maybe if we backtrack a little and then take this path." "Sveta, come on, think of something." Karina was growing anxious. Why is it that every time we take on something, even the simplest task turns into an adventure, and most of the time, it's not a safe one? "Karina, why are you always shouting like a scared person? I know every corner of this place." "Oh, really? Then show us the way, and, more importantly, how to get there." Sveta was about to respond when they heard a loud snap. It was a broken branch, and if it broke, someone must have broken it. Perhaps a bear. The girls screamed and quickly jumped back into the car. A shadow fell on the windshield, causing them to squint. They heard a cautious knock. Oddly enough, a bear wouldn't knock. The knock repeated, and Karina cautiously opened one eye, catching sight of a man peering at them with a mocking grin. "Ladies, are you lost?" Sveta stared and then squealed. "Igor, we need you so badly right now." She leaped out of the car, flinging her arms around his neck as Yegor burst into laughter. "Svetka, Aren't you a grown, respectable lady now? And yet you're throwing yourself at anyone, he exclaimed. Well, you're not just anyone. Karina, this is my childhood friend, my very best friend from childhood, Igor. We used to sneak into Grandma Efimovna's garden together and steal apples and strawberries, Svetka replied. Yegor took Karina's hand in his, flashing a smile. Don't believe her. She was the one doing the stealing. I was just keeping a lookout, while she quietly cried in fear around the corner. Svetka chuckled. Igor, what brings you here, in the woods? The same question goes for you. We asked first, Svetka retorted. I was going to visit Semyonovna and check on things, Igor explained. Sveta let out a sigh. We were also headed to Grandma's, trying to take a shortcut, but ended up getting lost. Sveta, when was the last time you wandered through these woods? Igor asked. I can't remember. About 3 years ago. All right, let's see what you've managed to get yourselves into, Igor said, settling down in front of the car, while Karina watched him with delight. He wasn't showing off or trying to appear tougher than he was. He exuded a quiet strength, and his muscles flexed beneath his black t-shirt. He discarded his windbreaker jacket, revealing a belt with ammunition, the kind worn by hunters. Karina's gaze wandered around and landed on the rifle leaning against a nearby tree. Do you have the keys to the car? Igor asked. Yeah, Sveta nodded, and Igor took the driver's seat. Within 5 minutes, he was skillfully maneuvering the car through the forest. Time passed, and they arrived at a large clearing, with a forest on one side and a lake on the other. Karina's jaw dropped in awe. The place resembled an illustration from a children's storybook. She stepped out of the car. Oh my, it's a place of unearthly beauty. Igor gently turned her around by the shoulders, directing her gaze towards the lake. Look. He clapped his hands with a resounding noise, and suddenly, from an unseen spot below, behind the tall grass that concealed the shoreline, a flock of swans ascended gracefully into the sky. Karina stood frozen in awe. This doesn't happen, she stammered. But it does. It just doesn't happen to us, Yegor replied. Turning around, Yegor pointed in a specific direction. There's Semyonovna, he announced. The girls followed his gaze, their eyes landing on their grandmother, who was rushing towards them. She insisted on being called grandmother and nothing else. With a light-colored kerchief adorning her head, a blue apron, and a long skirt, she appeared to be somewhere in her 70s or even 90s. Svetlana, what took you so long? I already sent Yegor to find out where you went, she exclaimed, embracing her granddaughter. Sveta pulled away for a moment, perplexed. Grandma, how did you know we were coming? Ah, my dear child, don't you know that I can sense when my kin are approaching? Grandmother replied with a chuckle. Karina gazed at her grandmother with wide eyes, and grandmother couldn't help but laugh. Don't be scared, my sweet, I won't bite. My name is Agrippina Semyonovna, and what's yours? Karina, she replied timidly. Good, let's not waste any time. The pies are getting cold, grandmother said cheerfully. Svetka jumped up in excitement. My favorite, the ones with duck. The old woman smiled. Of course, your favorite. You can thank Yegor for the duck. As soon as he heard you were coming, he fetched the fattest one. Sveta cast a sly glance at Yegor. And when did you find out that I was coming, Yegor? He shrugged his shoulders. Semyonovna mentioned it during lunch 2 days ago. Sveta chuckled. Funny, we only decided to come yesterday evening. Oh, Grandma, they'll accuse you of being a witch and burn you at the stake. Grandmother laughed heartily. Who needs me an old? Karina found immense pleasure in her surroundings. The tranquility and beauty of the place captivated her. In the evening, she and Sveta decided to visit the lake. Sveta, who is this Yegor person? Does he live nearby? Karina inquired. He used to live here when we were young, Sveta replied. We were good friends with him back then. I was 10 years old and Yegor, well, he was 15 when they left. But now he's back. I don't know the reason or how long he plans to stay. He promised us a barbecue tomorrow, so I'll ask him all about it. Why do you want to know? Karina blushed suddenly and responded, "Oh, no particular reason." "Hold on a minute, my friend. What's going on? Is there something more?" Sveta pressed, raising an eyebrow. Sveta kept teasing Karina, provoking her, and Karina eventually got annoyed and defended herself. "Stop it, Sveta. Why are you acting like a child?" "Karina, it's love at first sight," Sveta exclaimed. "Enough. Why are you talking nonsense?" Karina retorted. "Well, this time I actually approve of your choice, especially since he seems interested in you too." "Oh, if you say so." The 5 days of vacation flew by in an instant. Karina knew that the most lasting memory from this trip would be Yegor. She realized that for the first time in her life, she had encountered a genuine man, the kind any woman could only dream of. However, Yegor didn't make any advances towards her, despite Karina's certainty that he had feelings for her. He cracked jokes, grilled kebabs for them, and even took them fishing. Afterward, Karina vowed solemnly that she would give her entire salary for life to the person who could come up with a way to eradicate all mosquitoes. On the last day, Yegor had to leave early. "My vacation is over too. I'll be leaving this evening. We will definitely meet again," he assured Karina. Karina watched as he vanished into the woods, then turned to meet her grandmother's gaze. Her grandmother's eyes seemed to penetrate her soul. "Come, my dear, let's go inside and talk over tea," her grandmother suggested. Sveta tried to join them, but her grandmother stopped her. "Granddaughter, no offense, but I need to have a private conversation with Karina. Isn't that why you brought her here?" "Yes, Grandma, I'll go for a walk by the lake," Sveta acquiesced. Karina felt both curiosity and apprehension as she followed her grandmother inside. Sveta had shared many stories about her grandmother, and now it was time to meet her in person. The old woman prepared some tea. "Tell me, what's troubling you?" asked the concerned voice. Karina hesitated for a moment before responding. "It's nothing special. I've been having a lot of dreams, particularly nightmares. They are vivid images of when my parents died." "And how often do you have these dreams?" inquired the empathetic listener. "It happens whenever I start dating a guy, even when I'm in a serious relationship or married. I have these dreams, and I wake up screaming. They think I'm crazy." Karina's voice trailed off, filled with frustration. The listener understood and replied, "They may react that way, but it's not unusual." "But what about when you're not in a relationship? Do you still have these dreams?" "No, not once," Karina admitted. "It's only when I'm involved with someone." "Do you think it's my parents trying to communicate with me, telling me that he's not the right one?" The listener paused for a moment, considering the question. "No, Karina, your parents have nothing to do with it. You are telling yourself that. Subconsciously, you realize that you don't truly want to be with this person, but you haven't found a way to express it. So you've created a fairy tale in your mind. And when the conscious mind rests, the subconscious takes over. That's why your dreams try to push away what you find undesirable. But don't worry, my child. You will find someone you genuinely love, and you'll get married sooner than you think. And in that love, you won't scream in your sleep." Karina felt her eyelids growing heavy as the listener's words comforted her. "You're right. I should let go and trust that things will work out," she said softly. "Go to sleep now, my child. Sleep and see what you dream. Pay attention," the listener encouraged. As Karina drifted off to sleep, she woke up abruptly, finding herself back at the table where the conversation had taken place. Confused, she exclaimed, "Oh, how did I fall asleep?" The listener, now revealed to be her grandmother, smiled gently and asked, "Karina, who did you meet in your dream?" A rush of warmth flooded Karina's heart. "You won't believe it, Grandma. I was talking to you. I felt so happy to see you. You were just as I remembered." Her grandmother nodded. "Who else did you encounter?" "Our neighbor, the one who passed away when I was little." I don't remember him very well, Karina replied, reminiscing. Anyone else? Her grandmother inquired further. Grandma Sonia. She lived across the street. She passed away shortly after we learned about Grandma's passing, Karina recalled, her voice tinged with nostalgia. Her grandmother's expression turned serious as she asked, anything else? Karina shivered, feeling a chill run down her spine. She met her grandmother's intense gaze, and her eyes had transformed from their usual light blue to a deep, penetrating black. I don't know, I can't remember. I don't think there was anyone else, Karina stammered, feeling a mixture of fear and confusion. Her grandmother's demeanor softened. And what did Grandma say to you? Karina struggled to recall. She scolded me and told me to go home because my parents were worried. The room fell into a heavy silence as her grandmother nodded in response. That's good, she muttered under her breath. Suddenly, the old lady seemed ordinary once again, her eyes returning to their light blue color. The weight of the moment lifted, leaving Karina bewildered yet strangely comforted. Karina, please listen to me. I rarely admit being wrong, but now I fear I might be mistaken. You've encountered everyone who has passed away, every person you knew, but your parents never appeared to you. Yes, that's true. Why haven't they? I believe they aren't counted among the deceased, yet I cannot see them among the living either. There seems to be no connection that should bind you. It appears that they are not dead, and if they are alive, they are unaware of your existence. How is that possible? I cannot provide a definite answer to that. I have shared all the information I possess. Karina unexpectedly encountered Kostya at the cafe on the first day. Karina, we need to talk. Where did you vanish to? You disappeared without a word. I could be offended. Kostya glanced at her playfully, and Karina realized that her newfound joy from the trip had swiftly evaporated. How could she have believed she loved this charming man? Kostya, we have nothing to discuss. You and I made a mistake in thinking there could be something between us. Karina, my patience is not endless. I repeat, I might take offense. Seriously. Karina had the urge to punch that self-absorbed jerk. She mustered a smile and recalled Svetka's fitting epithet. Kostya, stay away from me for good. Does that make more sense to you? She walked away, and Kostya watched her depart, puzzled. What was wrong with her? So defiant, so unlike her usual self. Those timid girls always irritated him. Maybe they should give it another try. Well, he had work to do now, but later, after work, that could work out. Karina couldn't focus on her work. Throughout the day, she couldn't stop thinking about what the elderly woman had revealed to her. By day's end, she had made her decision. When her boss spotted her, he immediately spoke up. No more time off, and even if there were, don't bother asking. Karina sat down in front of him determinedly. I truly need it. I really do. Otherwise, I might have to resign. Karina, what's happening to you? Where are you going? I need to go home. Some urgent matters have come up. I can't explain it properly. It's about my parents. I see. Will a week be enough? You're the best boss in the world. Karina rushed down the stairs. She had already booked her plane ticket. Now she needed to quickly pack her belongings and head to the airport. Karina. Kostya, what now? We need to talk. Not now, please. Even better, never. Kostya firmly grasped her hand, refusing to let go. You're clearly caught up in something right now. That's why you're acting so recklessly. But I forgive you, he said. Get out of here, she exclaimed, attempting to free her arm from his grip. Despite her efforts, Kostya held on tightly, causing her pain. Release the girl, a familiar voice commanded, instantly recognizable to Karina. Kostya abruptly let go of her hand, and she rushed into Yegor's embrace. So that's it, Kostya muttered, suppressing the urge to utter a harsh word as he noticed Yegor's clenched fist. Igor, I only have 2 hours before my flight, Karina began. It's a long story. Yegor opened the car door for her. Get in and tell me the address. I'll listen to you, he offered. Karina recounted everything to Yegor, starting from the moment the news appeared on TV years ago. Yegor drove her to the airport where they arrived. There, he kissed her and spoke, I'll be waiting. If you need my help, call me immediately. I'll come over. She nestled closer to him. Just wait for me, she whispered. He chuckled. Yes, I've waited 30 years. A few days won't be a problem. With a heavy heart, the girl strolled down the street. This was the path she used to take to school, and that was where her grandmother would turn when heading to the market on Saturdays. Occasionally, Karina would accompany her, although she despised those outings. On Saturdays, all she wanted was to sleep, not visit the market in the morning. 2 more houses, then a corner, and she would see her home. It was likely in ruins by now, not due to old age, but due to vandals. People had a penchant for breaking glass, and misfortune seemed to follow. Karenavka, is that you? A voice called out. She halted in her tracks. Standing before her was an elderly woman wearing a hat. Goodness, it was Aunt Galia, the neighbor who was supposed to keep an eye on her house. I'm Aunt Galia. Hello. And suddenly, the neighbor burst into tears. It's about time, she exclaimed. Who told you? They're going insane. They've turned the whole area upside down. Who, Aunt Galia? Karina asked. The neighbor fell silent all of a sudden, her eyes widening. Karenavka, don't you know anything? She whispered. Karina's heart began to race. She raised her voice, switching to shouting, What do I know? Auntie Galia, tell me. But the neighbor couldn't utter a word. She only managed to whisper, Run, Karenavka, run home. A realization struck Karina. No, she didn't think her mother and father would be waiting for her at home. Or would they? She quickened her pace and then started running, awkwardly dragging her suitcase behind her. The house should be here now, Karina paused. The house didn't appear abandoned. The windows had clean glass and there were flowers. Perhaps she had found some relatives. Yes, that must be it. She didn't know much. She was so young. There had to be someone. One grandmother wasn't all she had. That would be good. If Auntie Galia said they were looking for her, they would surely be happy to see her. And how overjoyed she would be. It was difficult to live knowing you were alone in the world. Karina reached the gate. In the yard, there was a woman sitting in the gazebo that her father had built for her. Who was she? Maybe a relative or maybe a complete stranger. After all, the house had been vacant for so long. Karina's heart skipped a beat. The woman looked just like her mother. Could she be a sister? Why not? Karina enjoyed watching melodramas, and there was always some secret child revealed by the end of the movie. Karina was about to cough, but the woman turned her head as if listening. That's when Karina realized that the woman couldn't see. She was blind, and Karina recognized her. Mom, Karina shouted so loudly that birds scattered from every tree in the neighborhood. The woman slowly rose and looked in Karina's direction, yet past her. Karina? Karenavka? She called out. Karina rushed toward her, grabbing her, embracing her tightly. She sobbed uncontrollably, unable to hear her own words. All she could manage to repeat was, Mommy, Mommy, Mommy. The woman kissed her hair and echoed her sentiments, saying, My baby girl, my little girl, and then someone lifted Karina up into their arms. Daughter, they exclaimed. That was the final blow. Daddy, Karina whispered as consciousness began to slip away. Late at night, they sat together at the table. It's better not to describe how Karina came to her senses, thinking it was just another dream. Once the emotions had settled a bit, and they sat there holding hands, Karina's father began to speak. 12 years ago, we were also caught up in it. However, our mission was slightly different, but that's not important now. No one rescued us back then. We became the kind of people who were simply unwanted and even dangerous here. We spent 5 years wandering without any identification. If we had approached people, they might have helped us, but our lives would have been worthless. And then, due to the trauma she endured, your mother started losing her eyesight. There was nothing we could do. so we left the mountains. They immediately threw us in jail. Yes, according to the laws of that state, we had committed a crime, albeit in our own state. But that's beside the point. 6 months ago, we were swapped for other individuals who had committed similar offenses in our country. Everything has changed since then. It's a whole new world now. Mom has already undergone surgery, and the doctors say there is hope. We tried to find you, but we had to do it discreetly. We were immediately instructed to forget about our past lives. Just yesterday morning, I finally discovered your town. I didn't have your phone number or the exact address, but my mother and I made the decision to come here. We couldn't find you from where we were. We already have the tickets in hand. And you? How did you manage? You haven't been here for 10 years, and you didn't leave any contact information for anyone. It was difficult for me. I didn't want to, I couldn't. I sent money to Uncle Kolia, the caretaker, to look after Grandma's grave. But your graves were here. I couldn't bring myself to return. But then, I had a dream. Grandma appeared, and all the people I knew who had passed away were there, except you. She told me you weren't among the deceased. Daughter, I don't know if I'll ever see you again, but I'm certain you're the most beautiful. Her mother gently caressed Karina's hand, and her father spoke up immediately. Mother, there's no doubt about it. They went to bed that morning. Karina in her room, and her parents in theirs. Everything felt just like before, as if it had been a long time ago. Karina texted her friend. Parents are alive. More details later. She quickly turned off her phone, knowing Svetka all too well. In the morning, she was awakened by voices and the clatter of dishes in the kitchen. Karina stretched and thanked God. She had never felt so relieved. She picked up her phone and turned it on, only to find numerous texts waiting for her. Svetka had called 34 times. There was one text message that caught her attention. Igor followed you. Karina sat up abruptly on the bed. That voice in the kitchen. She wanted to get up, but before she could, the door swung open, revealing Yegor standing in the doorway, thoughtfully munching on a sandwich. Come on, sleepyhead, get up. Otherwise, we'll devour all the sandwiches. For some reason, Karina burst into tears, startling Yegor. Why are you crying? What's wrong? He asked, concerned. Her father's voice came from behind Yegor. Don't worry, Yegor. Women are mysterious creatures. They cry when things are bad, when they're sad. And they cry when everything is good, when they're happy. It's hard to tell what's going on in their heads, whether it's grief or joy. Svetka took charge of the situation. Yegor, why are you stomping around like a bear? Bring the salad, and make sure you don't drop it. Sveta, when have I ever dropped anything? Well, everyone starts somewhere. Sometimes I feel like giving you a good scolding. Oh, you've been threatening me since you were a child. Mom, Dad, and Godmother are arguing again. The little girl approached Karina with an air of excitement, fueled by her tendency to tattle on others. Yegor turned around and remarked, and Marinka is such a snitch. Mama! Marinka exclaimed, startled by the unexpected revelation. Karina embraced the little girl, casting a playful glance at her husband. Well, that's not entirely true. Daddy is just teasing, Karina reassured her. They're here, she exclaimed suddenly, noticing a car approaching their house. It was Karina's father, who had just picked up her mother from the hospital. Her mother had undergone her final surgery, and her father had excitedly shared the good news over the phone. Igor scooped up Marinka, who had already forgotten her previous offense and clung tightly to him, and helped his wife up. Karina, just 2 weeks away from her due date, felt the twins occupying an increasingly significant amount of space within her. She glanced out the window and caught sight of her mother stepping out of the car. Her mother looked around, touching things with her hands, before her gaze fell upon Karina. Their eyes locked momentarily, and then her mother's gaze scanned Karina's face and figure. A smile gradually formed on her mother's lips. My daughter, I always knew you were beautiful, she murmured, her voice filled with affection.